Tyrion Lannister stood upon the parapets of the Red Keep with the faintest edge of a cool sea breeze stirring the fine strands of his flaxen hair. Evening in King's Landing brought an uneasy hush that settled over the city like the calm before a storm, a quiet laced with tension in the aftermath of so many conflicts that had rocked the realm. The sky was a tapestry of fading oranges, purples, and deepening blues, as though the sun were bleeding its last colors onto the horizon. The faint, briny scent of the Blackwater rush clung to the air, merging with the aromas of dust, sweat, and cooking fires below. From his vantage point, Tyrion glimpsed a city that would soon learn his secrets, for he had harbored them too long. One in particular had grown far too large to remain hidden. He closed his eyes and allowed himself a moment of reflection, wondering if it was too late to turn back. But the time for doubting had passed. He was a Lannister, after all, and he had made his move. He descended a winding stairway, each footfall echoing against the cold stone walls. The halls of the Red Keep felt emptier these days, or perhaps it was only that so many of the formidable personalities that once populated these corridors were now absent, lost to war, betrayals, and the insatiable hunger of iron blades. And yet the ghosts lingered. He could almost see his father turning at a corner with a haughty sneer, or his sister strolling with measured grace beneath the arches, her eyes filled with cunning. But these were ghosts, and Tyrion had risen above them all. In a few more days, if everything fell into place, he would rule this city as no one had before. He would not sit upon the throne as a mere caretaker. He would be king with power absolute, and he would have the most persuasive advantage of all, a secret dragon. Though his childhood had been defined by humiliations and heartbreak, some deep instinct for survival and cunning had guided him here. Once upon a time, he had admired dragons only in stories, long nights by candlelight reading about Aegon the Conqueror, imagining the flames that had reduced Harrenhal to a charred ruin. He had never thought to actually possess a living beast of his own. But fortune, fate, or the gods, if there were any, had intervened. And now Tyrion found himself in the unlikeliest of positions. A man with not merely ambition, but the means to see it realized. He passed a row of guards who stood at attention. Though the Lannister crest still fluttered from certain pennants in King's Landing, his men wore simplified black and red uniforms. No lion ramped on their breastplates. They were men loyal not to a house, but to him personally. They saluted as he passed, words dying in their throats. The rumors had spread. Tyrion had done something monstrous or miraculous, or both. The word dragon was whispered in the corners of wine sinks and behind closed doors, but none dared speak it openly. In the charged hush, Tyrion could sense their fear. It was good to be feared, he thought, so long as it was balanced with a measure of respect. He dipped his head to them in faint acknowledgement, but there was no hint of a smile on his face. Beyond the guard station, he found himself navigating a warren of narrow corridors leading deep beneath the Red Keep. Years earlier, he had discovered the old passages through the labyrinth of cellars and vaults, a relic from the Targaryen era. He had used these passages in the past to escape detection, to facilitate covert meetings, and to store items he wished to keep hidden. Now, at the very end of this subterranean path, there was something he protected with every cunning resource he possessed. Before him lay a rough-hewn door of oak, banded with iron and watched by two of his most trusted men. One guard, older and grizzled with a scar tracing the line of his jaw, quickly unlocked the door with a key, stepping aside. Tyrion entered a massive, torchlit chamber. It was damp and smelled of old stone. The temperature was decidedly warmer, pressing with a cloying thickness that felt out of place so far underground. As he moved inside, a distinct rumble vibrated in the air, followed by the rustle of scales against the floor. He raised one of the torches, feeling its heat lick at his fingers. Then he beheld it, the small but steadily growing dragon that he had discovered nearly 2 years ago. He believed the creature to be female, was as black as pitch save for faint glimmers of bronze along the ridges of her wings. Her eyes were wide, reflecting the torchlight with gold-flecked brilliance. She blinked, hissed, and reared her head in curiosity. The sight sent a prickle of awe down Tyrion's spine. He had named her Hecavres, a bastardization of an old Valyrian word he had found in a moldy tome in the Red Keep's library. He was not entirely sure what it meant, something akin to hidden flame or silent fire. It felt fitting for the secret he had kept within these walls. When Tyrion had first come upon the creature, she had been no larger than a large cat, scrawny and on the verge of starvation, near some collapsed portion of the older cellars. Perhaps she had been left behind when Daenerys's brood soared off, or maybe she had hatched from an undiscovered egg hidden in the labyrinth of old Targaryen vaults. He would never know for certain, but he had fed her, tended to her, ensured her survival with an almost paternal devotion. She had grown, slowly at first, then at a pace that startled him. This was no pet. She was a living engine of fire and scale. He set the torch in a sconce and approached cautiously, though she recognized his scent by now. Hecavres was perhaps the size of a small horse, sinewy and sleek, coiled on a bed of straw. She watched him intently, as though constantly evaluating him. Once or twice she had snapped at strangers, but never at him. Tyrion offered her a chunk of raw goat meat from a heavy satchel he carried. Her serpentine neck darted forward, jaws snapping with a strength that could crush bones. He watched her devour the meal with quiet fascination. She emitted a satisfied rumble, then lowered her head closer, allowing him to gently rest a hand upon her scaled brow. The plan was bold, audacious. Some might call it madness. He had lived through too many deprivations to attempt it blindly. Yet the world would never give him anything if he approached only with caution. He recalled the words of Varys, who once told him that power resides where men believe it resides. He remembered too his father's unyielding contempt, the ways in which he had been discounted by everyone who saw only his stature. A dwarf, cunning with words but never meant for the seat of ultimate power. "Watch me now," he whispered against the dragon's hide. She blinked, and a gust of warm breath rushed from her nostrils, bathing him in heat that smelled faintly of burnt meat. He lingered a moment, silent, reflecting on the cost of what he planned. The Iron Throne was not a comfortable seat. It was said to cut men who were unworthy. Tyrion wondered if his father's ghost would be pleased or enraged by what his son was about to do. Perhaps both. "This is for me," Tyrion said quietly, realizing the words were an affirmation to himself as much as a reassurance to the dragon. Then he turned and left Hecavres in the gloom, instructing his guards to remain vigilant. No one but the small circle of men loyal to Tyrion, and well compensated for their loyalty, had any inkling of what lurked beneath the keep. That night, in his bedchamber, Tyrion tried to sleep but found no rest. His mind spun with calculations. Alliances, rivalries, debts, and the uncertain loyalties of the lords of Westeros. Much had changed since the war that left the realm fractured. The Targaryen queen had once seemed poised to seize power with her own dragons, but that story ended in tragedy, as so many of their stories did. Jon Snow, Aegon Targaryen, whoever he truly was, had vanished beyond the wall. Sansa Stark ruled the North in a harsh but fair manner, building a new legacy in Winterfell that kept her region aloof from the chaos that reigned in the South. Arya Stark was said to roam distant seas, searching for uncharted lands. Bran the Broken had reigned for a time, yet Bran's rule had proven ephemeral. Whispers abounded that the Boy King, if he was ever truly a boy, had slipped away, returning to the north, leaving the Iron Throne vacant once more. In the subsequent scramble, the lords had begun to turn on one another. A council had been convened to decide the realm's fate, yet it had devolved into infighting and sabotage. King's Landing was left rudderless, with only a provisional steward in the Red Keep. The city remembered Tyrion as a cunning operator, a man who had once served as Hand of the King. Now, with the old alliances fraying, he had maneuvered himself into the position of regent once again. But he wanted more than regency, he wanted the crown. He also understood that to claim the throne solely through cunning would not be enough. There needed to be fear, awe, or at least an incontrovertible demonstration of power to cow the great lords who would otherwise never bow to the imp. And so he had kept Hecavres a secret, Once she was fully grown, or at least large enough to pose a serious threat, he could make his move. One show of force, one demonstration of dragonfire, and no one would dare question the legitimacy of his reign. He would do what Daenerys had failed to do with all her might, unite the realm under one rule. But for that, he needed just a little more time. Dragons grew quickly, but not quickly enough to ease all his doubts. Lately, though, he felt that events were converging to force his hand. The opportunistic lords were plotting, and some might even be learning scraps of rumor about what he harbored in the depths of the Red Keep. Sometime in the small hours of morning, Tyrion slipped into a restless sleep, visited by half-dreams of his father's face wreathed in dragon flame, and the faint echo of a lion's roar mingled with the shriek of a dragon. He awoke with the first hint of dawn, sweaty and more exhausted than before. He rose from his bed and summoned Podrick, his loyal squire, once a wide-eyed boy, now a capable man who still found it easiest to trust Tyrion above all others. Podrick entered carrying a basin of water. Tyrion splashed his face, feeling the cold shock chase away the remnants of his uneasy dreams. He dressed with care in plain black garments, a far cry from the lavish attire he once favored. He needed to move about the city with as little notice as possible, for business awaited him that morning. He intended to visit a half-ruined tower on the edge of Flea Bottom, a place where he had stashed certain records that documented shipments of livestock, feed, and other items necessary for the care of a secret dragon. He had to ensure those records were destroyed or hidden so well that no prying eyes could ever piece the puzzle together. Podrick accompanied him through the streets, the two of them blending with the early morning crowd of laborers and fishmongers. The stench of waste and rotting fish was overwhelming, but Tyrion breathed it in without complaint. These were his streets now. If he truly wanted to rule, he could not allow his nose to wrinkle at the everyday realities of the city. The roads were rutted, the hovels ramshackle. Children with sunken cheeks ran barefoot past them, laughter sometimes edging into wails as scuffles broke out over scraps of bread. Here was a city in need of strong leadership, and Tyrion wondered if he truly had the stomach for everything that came with being a king, particularly in these times. As they turned a corner, an urchin darted by, nearly knocking into Podrick. The youth's eyes flicked from Podrick to Tyrion. Recognizing the imp, the boy stared openly for a moment. Then he scuttled away like a terrified spider. Prickle ran down Tyrion's spine. He was still recognized, and no matter how humble his clothing, some in King's Landing would always know him. He was, after all, infamous. Before long, they reached the dilapidated tower. It had once been a minor watchtower, now canted at an angle, its top partially caved in. Tyrion had chosen it because it was outside the usual watchful eyes of city guards and had enough hidden niches to store what he needed. Within a dark and narrow chamber, he crouched by a battered trunk. Fishing out a key from within his tunic, he unlocked the trunk and flipped the lid open. Inside were sealed parchments detailing everything from inventory manifests to schedules of feeding times. Tyrion dug through them quickly, scanning for anything that might hint at the dragon's existence. He cursed under his breath at a mention of special livestock, unaccounted for in the Red Keep's larder. That alone could raise eyebrows if it fell into the wrong hands. "Podrick," Tyrion said, handing over several sealed parchments. "Burn these. Make sure you do it in a place where the ashes can't be traced, and do it at once." Podrick nodded, grave but loyal. "Yes, my lord," he replied, and Tyrion could read no curiosity or judgment in the young man's eyes, just unquestioning obedience. They had come a long way since Podrick's first days as Tyrion's squire. Tyrion took another moment, rummaging to ensure nothing else could implicate him. Satisfied, he allowed the trunk to be sealed. Then he and Podrick departed in silence, weaving their way back through Flea Bottom. The air was warming, and the sun's rays found their way over the rooftops, turning the city from a place of shadows to one that glimmered with a harsh morning light. Tyrion took no delight in the day's brightness. With each passing hour, the tension in his gut tightened, as though something momentous was approaching. Later that day, he convened a small council of advisors in a discreet audience chamber in the Red Keep. The men were few in number, as Tyrion refused to trust many. Randall Prester, a stoic knight from the Westerlands who had grown disillusioned with the old ways, served as a blunt voice of reason. Then there was Gallion Derry, a minor lord from the Crownlands who was tired of the endless bickering among the more prominent families. Lastly, there was Molar Rivers, a bastard from the Riverlands, who seemed content to hitch himself to whoever offered him gold and security, and Tyrion had offered him plenty of both. They stood around a table strewn with maps of the 7 kingdoms, lines drawn and red markings scattered like fresh wounds. "My lord," said Randall, "House Tarly has been making overtures to the Stormlands, urging them to rally behind a new claimant. There are rumors that Gendry Baratheon might assert a right to the throne, albeit a tenuous one. If he garners enough support, we'll have a full rebellion to contend with." Tyrion listened, tapping his fingers lightly on the table. He had met Gendry once or twice, a quiet, hard-working youth who had proven his bravery on the battlefield. The man was a recognized bastard of Robert Baratheon, legitimized by royal decree under Daenerys Targaryen, if memory served. Could that be enough to sway the Stormlands? Perhaps. He would lack the resources, I think, but if the Stormlands unify under him, they might attempt a siege on King's Landing, Tyrion mused. How soon could such a force be mustered? Not quickly, Gallion Derry put in. They're still rebuilding after all the wars. But Tarly's a determined sort, and if the Reach supports him in any capacity, they could field a sizable army within a few moons. Tyrion forced a thoughtful hum. "Let them gather," he said, an edge creeping into his voice that made the others glance at him. "A demonstration of power might be precisely what we need to end all these half-hearted rebellions. We cannot let them swarm around us indefinitely." He let the words linger, not elaborating on the plan. None of them knew of the dragon, at least not explicitly. Perhaps they harbored suspicions that Tyrion had something secretive in store. But none dared to ask directly. The less they knew, the better for now. Tyrion pivoted to other matters. The grain stores in the Crownlands, the roads that needed repair, the gold that had to be scraped together to pay the city watch. The meeting wore on for hours, but with each passing minute, Tyrion felt an undercurrent of urgency. The realm was in a precarious position. He had to move swiftly. Afterward, as the council dispersed, Tyrion found himself lingering by the table. The realm's map stretched out before him, lines and sigils representing a tapestry of old loyalties and new ambitions. He placed a finger on King's Landing. It felt like the heart of a battered body, still pumping despite multiple wounds. He traced a path to the Westerlands, where Casterly Rock loomed. He felt no warmth for that place, his inheritance, and yet also the seat of so many memories that haunted him. He flicked his gaze to the Vale, still guarded by the Ares' high walls, likely indifferent to the southern squabbles so long as they remained unthreatened. He paused on the north, a vast expanse that had declared itself a separate kingdom under Sansa Stark's rule. Tyrion wondered if she would remain content to let the south devour itself. Probably, unless she felt threatened. Lastly, his eyes settled on the Stormlands, where Gendry might yet raise Robert Baratheon's old banner. If it came to that, Tyrion would not hesitate to do what was necessary to protect his future, even if it meant unleashing Hecavarys upon those who challenged him. He left the chamber at sunset. Passing under a colonnade, he paused to overlook the city, shrouded in the golden glow of approaching dusk. In the distance, bells tolled from the Great September, no longer the same sept that had been destroyed during Cersei's reign, but a rebuilt edifice that still tried to maintain the city's faith. Tyrion felt no comfort in those bells. Instead, they seemed like an ominous prelude. That night, Tyrion had a visitor. A cloaked figure arrived at the gates, handing over a token that allowed him entry without question. The guards, following Tyrion's explicit instructions, escorted him to a small salon off the main throne room. Tyrion sat alone, a goblet of arbor red in hand, waiting with the weary patience of a man who no longer bothered with the formalities of a proper court. When the visitor was brought in, Tyrion set down his goblet. "I wondered if you would come," he said. The visitor lowered his hood, revealing the tanned face of Dario Naharis. His once flamboyant curls were streaked with gray, and a scar trailed from his temple down to his jawline, but his roguish grin remained. "I got your message," Dario said in a soft voice. "You never told me you had designs on a throne, dwarf." Tyrion exhaled slowly, ignoring the slight, or perhaps relishing it. "I didn't think I needed to. You're a cell's word, Dario. You fought for many who sought power. This time, I want you to fight for me." Dario gave a casual shrug. "What's in it for me?" Tyrion's gaze flicked over the man, assessing. He had once served Daenerys Targaryen, rumored to still care deeply for the lost queen. After her defeat and eventual death, Dario had turned mercenary again, leading a company of exiled Dothraki and freedmen across Essos, so the tales went. "Gold, of course," Tyrion said. "Enough to keep you in comfort for a lifetime. Lands in Westeros if you desire them. Titles if that pleases you. But more than that, a chance to be on the winning side for once." Dario snorted. "Oh, I've been on the winning side plenty. But you do recall how things ended for your last queen?" "Yes." Tyrion felt a pang at that reference. Daenerys had once seemed unstoppable with our dragons, yet she had succumbed to her own brand of madness and the relentless swirl of political intrigue. He offered a cryptic smile. "This time is different." "How so?" Tyrion allowed himself a moment before answering. "Because I've learned from her mistakes. I know what not to do, and I have something she no longer has." Dario's eyes narrowed. "A dragon?" Tyrion remained silent, letting the question hover. Dario's expression darkened. "I heard rumors, but I didn't believe them. Do you truly have a dragon hidden under this keep?" Tyrion leaned back in his chair, the wood creaking. He took a sip of wine, savoring the dryness. "Believe what you wish, but if you think to side with Gendry or any other pretender, you might consider if they can match what I have to offer." Dario studied Tyrion for a long moment. Then his lips curled into a wolfish grin. Well, Tyrion Lannister, the Dragon of King's Landing. It's quite the story. Suppose I stay. Suppose I lend my support. When do you plan to reveal your great beast to the world?" "That depends on forces outside my control," Tyrion said. "But soon. Tarly is making noise in the Reach. The Stormlands may yet rally behind Gendry Baratheon. If they march on King's Landing, we'll need a demonstration that will leave no doubt." The cell's word nodded slowly, and Tyrion saw the gleam of excitement in his eyes. "All right, Lannister, I'll join your cause. But if I get wind that you're leading us into a fiasco, I'll slip out of the city faster than you can wink, dragon or no dragon." Tyrion inclined his head in acknowledgement. "I wouldn't expect anything less." Dario bowed, more a mocking gesture than a respectful one, and took his leave. Alone again, Tyrion contemplated the swirling contents of his goblet. The notion of bringing Dario and his men into the city was risky, but Tyrion needed experience in unconventional warfare. Dario had fought in more battles across Essos than most knights in Westeros could imagine. If Tyrion was truly going to seize and hold the Iron Throne, he'd need such an edge. But as he drained the last of the wine, his mind drifted back to that single question. Was this madness? So many had tried to rule. So many had failed. Even Daenerys with 3 dragons had come undone. Tyrion had one. A juvenile dragon, still growing, though formidable in its own right. He set the goblet down with a sharp rap against the table, refusing to let doubt paralyze him. He was committed. In the following weeks, the city braced for change. Tyrion watched the Watch, specifically the loyalty of the City Watch, ensuring the gold cloaks were under his control. He distributed coin among their ranks, replaced higher officers with men loyal to him, and purged a few suspects who seemed too beholden to outside interests. Each day, Hecavres grew stronger, her appetite voracious. The cost in livestock alone was staggering, but Tyrion spared no expense, feeding her goats, sheep, sometimes entire cattle. His sworn men kept her fed and groomed, scouring the countryside for beasts. The rumor mill churned, yet no one dared state outright that a dragon hid beneath the Red Keep. Then came the reports. Gendry Baratheon had been recognized by several lords of the Stormlands. He was marching with a modest force, and rumor suggested Tarly might join him. Another message arrived from the Reach, carrying veiled threats and urgent entreaties for King's Landing to acknowledge Gendry's claim. Tyrion received this in the quiet of his study, reading it by candlelight. He felt the flicker of an ironic smile cross his face. They demanded his surrender, urging him to stand down in favor of a true Baratheon. Tyrion crumpled the parchment and tossed it into the fireplace, watching it shrivel to ash. There was no more time for half measures. That night, he went down to the subterranean chamber again, accompanied by 2 of his most trusted guards, and Dario, who insisted on seeing the creature for himself. Dario's usually cocksure demeanor flickered with awe when he beheld Hecavres. She stretched out her neck, hissing at the newcomers. Her black scales shimmered beneath the torchlight, and the arcs of her wings cast monstrous shadows across the walls. Dario let out a low whistle. "She's beautiful. Smaller than I thought, but beautiful." "She grows quickly," Tyrion said, stepping closer. Hecavres sniffed his hand, then relaxed when she recognized his scent. "Soon, she'll be large enough to carry a rider if needed." Dario glanced at Tyrion with a half-smile. "I wonder who that rider might be." Tyrion shrugged. "I'm not suicidal enough to try flying on a dragon, if that's what you're asking." "Well," Dario said, "someone has to do it eventually." Tyrion stared into the dragon's eyes. "We'll see." From that moment on, the city took on an air of growing tension, as if the populace felt an unspoken shift in the wind. Tyrion consolidated his forces, quietly reinforcing the gates and strengthening the city walls. He knew Gendry's men would come sooner rather than later. In hurried meetings, Tyrion's advisors asked if they should send envoys, attempt negotiations, or bribes. Tyrion waved them off. The time for negotiation had passed. He intended to make a statement so decisive that no one would again question his right to rule. Behind closed doors, he and Dario discussed a plan that could break an enemy host before it even reached the city gates. Word eventually arrived that Gendry's force was gathering near Hayford, preparing to march along the King's Road. In the interim, Tarly had indeed mustered a small but disciplined army from the Reach. Exact numbers were unknown, but enough to pose a threat if King's Landing was unprepared. Tyrion had the advantage of walls and knowledge of the terrain, and he had a dragon, one he intended to deploy in a manner that would break the spirit of any attacking force. Yet as the days passed, a gnawing sense of apprehension took hold of him. Hecavres was fearsome but still young. If she were wounded or killed by a well-placed scorpion bolt, all of Tyrion's plans would crumble. He questioned himself in the privacy of his chambers, but outwardly, he maintained an air of unwavering resolve. At last, the day came when messengers reported that Gendry and Tarly's combined host was within striking distance of King's Landing, a day's march away. The city braced for siege. The bells tolled, calls to arms rang out, and the gold cloaks mustered at the gates. Ordinary folk hunkered down in their hovels, some praying to the Seven for deliverance. Tyrion arranged a vantage point on the eastern walls, away from the main gates, intending to watch the battle unfold from a place of relative safety. Dario, clad in mismatched armor that reflected his mercenary style, joined him. Knights and men-at-arms formed ranks in the open field outside the city, though not too far from the gates. Tyrion's plan was to lure the enemy forward with a display of limited defenders while keeping Hecavres concealed until the moment of maximum impact. From the wall, Tyrion gazed across the dusty expanse. The sky was a stark azure, the midday sun merciless. Great siege engines, catapults, trebuchets were being positioned by the enemy. Swarms of infantry bearing the sigils of House Baratheon and House Tarly were forming lines. In the distance, he could make out a lone rider in black and gold armor at the front, a banner with the crowned stag snapping in the wind. That must be Gendry. Tyrion felt a ripple of memory. Gendry was said to be an honorable man, a good smith, strong of arm and kind of heart. But honor and kindness had little place in the game Tyrion was now playing. As the armies settled into place, a hush seemed to descend. Tyrion's men were tense, untested. Though Tyrion had purged disloyal elements, he knew some among them had never faced the horrors of open battle. Tyrion inhaled, the dryness of the day stinging his lungs. Dario, standing beside him, scanned the enemy lines with a practiced eye. "They have more men," he muttered. "But we've got the walls and archers. They'll lose many if they try a direct assault." "They likely know that," Tyrion said. "I suspect Tarly will attempt to starve us out or test our gates. But I don't intend to let him do either." Dario raised an eyebrow. "So you're finally going to unleash the beast?" At first, Tyrion said nothing. Then he nodded. "I'll give the order at the opportune moment. Until then, keep your men ready. If you see a chance to strike from the flank, do it." Dario saluted lazily and took his leave, descending the steps to join his company outside the walls. Tyrion watched him go, feeling the tug of nerves in his stomach. He signaled to one of his loyal knights. "Fetch the beast," he ordered. The knight nodded and hurried away. Moments stretched. The siege began in earnest, with Gendry's forces slowly advancing. They sent forth lines of archers, testing the walls with arrow volleys. King's Landing's archers returned fire, and the fields between the armies became a lethal hail of shafts. Screams drifted up to Tyrion's position as men fell on both sides. Trebuchets hurled stones at the walls, causing thunderous impacts that shook the ramparts. One chunk of masonry collapsed along an outlying fortification, sending dust and rubble into the air. Tyrion gritted his teeth, every blow reminding him that despite the city's defenses, a determined siege could eventually breach them. At length, Gendry's cavalry stirred, forming lines that might attempt a charge toward one of the gates. Tyrion knew the moment had come. If the cavalry gained enough momentum, they could smash through some weaker sections. He glanced downward into the courtyard behind the gates, where he spied the heavy oak doors being unbarred from within. The plan was to lure them in, let them believe they could breach the gate, then close it behind them and unleash Hecavarys to cut them off from escape. Through the swirling dust, Tyrion's heart pounded. If this went wrong, if the dragon refused to fight or was killed, he would lose everything. And if it worked, he would have the power to make all Westeros tremble. Below, the city gate creaked open. A ragged cheer went up from the attackers, misreading the sign as King's Landing's defenders faltering. The cavalry began to gallop forward, lances lowered, hoofs pounding the earth. Tyrion's men pretended to panic, pulling back in feigned disarray. Gendry himself led the charge, that black and gold armor gleaming in the sun. In moments, they had thundered across the killing field and smashed through the gate, streaming into the courtyard. Dust and confusion swirled as King's Landing defenders seemed to scatter. But then, with a shout, the portcullis slammed shut behind them, sealing them inside. Archers appeared along the inner battlements, letting loose a deadly volley upon the trapped cavalry. The courtyard erupted into chaos as Gendry's men wheeled about, trying to find an exit. Tyrion, from his vantage point on the walls, allowed himself a grim smile. This was his moment. He gave a signal to his knight, who disappeared beneath the archway leading to the deeper bowels of the Red Keep. A few heartbeats later, a roar resounded, a deep, guttural sound that echoed off the stone walls like thunder. The trapped cavalry whirled in alarm, horses snorting and rearing. In the gloom of the open vault, two golden eyes shone. And then Hecavarys emerged into the courtyard, wings partially unfurled, black scales rippling with power. She opened her jaws, and a jet of flame burst forth, scorching the lead riders. The heat was so intense that even from the walls Tyrion felt the oven-like blast. Horses screamed, men shrieked, and chaos engulfed the courtyard. Gendry's cavalry tried to scatter, but there was nowhere to go. Archers rained arrows from above, while Hecavarys spewed flames that turned men into living torches. Tyrion watched, dispassionate. The courtyard below became an inferno of swirling flames, smoke, and the desperate cries of dying men. It was brutal, horrifying, and yet the demonstration he had deemed necessary. Let the realm see that he was not to be trifled with. Let them witness what it meant to challenge the dragon of King's Landing. In the confusion, Gendry tried to rally his men, but a blast of fire swept in his direction, toppling horse and rider alike. Tyrion thought he glimpsed Gendry rolling clear of the flames. Even if he survived, the message was clear. No one would seize King's Landing from Tyrion so easily. Below, Hecavres snapped her jaws on a fallen horse, the courtyard filled with the stench of charred flesh. Tyrion forced himself to keep watching. This was what it meant to rule through fear. Outside the walls, the rest of Gendry and Tarly's forces saw the plumes of smoke and fire rising from within the gate. The sound of the dragon's roar carried across the battlefield. Panic spread through their ranks. Some men began to retreat. Others tried to form lines, but the sense of unstoppable dread had already taken hold. Meanwhile, Dario led his mercenaries in a flank attack, harassing the disorganized enemy. King's Landing's archers surged from hidden positions in the fields, pelting the besieging forces with arrow fire. The result was a complete rout. Tarly's men broke ranks. Some fled, others threw down their arms and begged for mercy. Within an hour, the combined host was in shambles. The throne Tyrion sought was secure. Amid the aftermath, Tyrion descended from the walls into the smoking courtyard. The heat assailed him. Bodies lay strewn like broken dolls, the smell of burned hair and flesh clinging in the air. He passed a blackened ruin that might once have been a horse, half its ribcage exposed. Hecavres was perched near the far side of the courtyard, her flanks heaving, smoke curling from her nostrils. Soldiers gave her a wide berth, fear etched on every face. Tyrion approached cautiously, though he made a point to keep his steps measured. If he showed fear, it would undermine the image he had worked so hard to craft. He looked around, searching for Gendry. He found the would-be king near a collapsed statue, armor scorched and dented. Gendry was alive but badly injured. His face blackened with soot, hair singed, blood oozing from a deep cut in his shoulder. A broken warhammer lay at his side. Tyrion signaled his guards to stand back. He knelt next to Gendry, meeting the man's glazed eyes. At the sight of Tyrion, Gendry tried to speak, but only coughed up blood. Tyrion felt a pang in his chest, seeing the battered figure that might have been a decent man in another life. "Mercy," Gendry croaked. "Please." Tyrion pursed his lips. Once, he might have offered the man a chance to bend the knee. But he could not afford half measures, not now. Pity warred with practicality in his mind. Then he recalled the hollowness he had felt when Daenerys burned King's Landing. He remembered the vow he made never to let such horror happen again. And here he was, presiding over a courtyard filled with flame and charred bodies. "I'm sorry," Tyrion whispered. Then he drew a dagger from his belt and, with grim efficiency, slit Gendry's throat. The man's eyes went wide, then vacant, as his life drained away onto the scorched stones. Tyrion rose, leaning on his cane, a polished piece of dragon bone. Ironically, he felt the eyes of onlookers upon him, some of his men, some of Dario's mercenaries, all regarding him in a mixture of awe and dread. In that moment, he realized he had done it. The city and the realm would see that the imp, the dwarf Lannister, had destroyed a Baratheon pretender with dragonfire. A hush settled, broken only by the crackle of dying flames and the low rumble of Hecavres. He turned to face the men, raising his voice so they could hear. "King's Landing is secure," he declared. "Let none doubt our strength. Let none doubt who rules." His words echoed off the ruined walls. At length, a ragged cheer arose from some corners, while others remained silent, staring with haunted eyes at the wreckage. In the hours that followed, Tyrion's men set about the grim task of disposing of bodies, mending the damaged gate, and bringing the city back to order. Hecavres was led, cautiously, back into her vault beneath the keep. Tyrion stood by as workers piled corpses onto carts. The stench was indescribable. Smoke still hung in the air. He felt weary beyond measure, drained by the weight of what he had unleashed. But deep inside, he also felt a coil of triumph. He had proved the might of his reign. In the days that followed, messages flew across the realm. Tales spread like wildfire of how Tyrion Lannister had revealed a secret dragon that annihilated the Baratheon and Tarly host in a single brutal stroke. Some said the ghost of Tywin Lannister must have smiled in the halls of the damned that day, proud that his dwarf son had finally embraced the raw power of fear. Others whispered that the gods would never forgive another King's Landing massacre. Yet, for all the rumors, one fact remained unchallenged. Tyrion now stood uncontested in the south. A few minor lords quickly bent the knee, swearing fealty to the new king of Westeros, or at least the southern portion of it. The realm's shape was shifting again. New lines were being drawn, new loyalties forged in the crucible of Dragonfire. Tyrion assembled a grand ceremony in the throne room of the Red Keep to be crowned. The Iron Throne, a hulking mass of fused swords hammered by the fires of Aegon's dragon centuries ago, sat waiting. Tyrion had never truly liked the thing. It was hideous, an uncomfortable seat that symbolized the brutality of conquest. But if he were to rule, the image of him perched upon those swords would be more potent than any words. There were murmurs in the assembled crowd as Tyrion, clad in ceremonial black tunic with gold trim, limped down the aisle toward the throne. Men and women parted for him, some bowing, some kneeling. A hush fell over the chamber like a shroud. In the front row stood Dario Naharis, a sardonic grin on his face, arms crossed. Near him were Tyrion's few loyal council members, wearing expressions of uneasy pride. At Tyrion's side walked a high septon, an aging man with wide, watery eyes who had agreed to anoint Tyrion as king, under some pressure, no doubt. The old man carried a small dish of sacred oils. Behind him, a pair of gold cloaks carried a velvet cushion upon which sat a simple crown of black iron and gold filigree, newly forged by the city's blacksmiths at Tyrion's request. Tyrion mounted the steps to the Iron Throne, each footstep an act of will. He turned to face the crowd. The High Septon stepped forward, raising his voice in the formal incantation, speaking of duty, justice, and the blessings of the Seven. Tyrion listened, reflecting on how many times such words had been spoken for kings who led the realm to ruin. He vowed to be different, though the gore on his hands reminded him that all kings must take lives in pursuit of their vision. When the incantation was done, the High Septon took the crown from the cushion and gently placed it upon Tyrion's head. "Behold," the High Septon said, voice trembling, "Tyrion of House Lannister, first of his name, King of the Undulls and the First Men, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms, and Protector of the Realm." The crowd bowed, a wave of kneeling figures fanning out through the throne room. Tyrion's eyes swept over them, registering the swirl of fear, respect, and uncertainty. Then, with a deep breath, he turned to seat himself upon the Iron Throne. The swords bit into him as he settled, a jagged blade pressing against his spine. Perhaps it was a reminder of how precarious his new position truly was. He folded his hands over his lap. The hush held. No cheers erupted, for the memory of the courtyard carnage was still fresh. In that charged silence, Tyrion's voice resonated. "Rise," he commanded. The assembled courtiers stood. Tyrion surveyed them, feeling the weight of the metal crown on his brow. "The wars have torn us apart long enough," he announced. "We will build a new peace in Westeros. Justice for all, mercy for the deserving, and punishment for those who would plunge the realm back into chaos." As he spoke, he made eye contact with a few lords who had gathered, men who once might have scoffed at the idea of Tyrion as their king. Now they wore carefully schooled faces. He saw the glint of calculation in some, the flicker of fear in others. He recalled the words of Varys, "Power resides where men believe it resides." And in that moment, Tyrion realized that, for now at least, they believed it resided with him. The presence of a dragon, even hidden beneath the keep, was enough to shatter their illusions. Now he must use that advantage to govern, to rebuild, and to ensure no one else rose against him. In the weeks following his coronation, Tyrion instituted a wave of reforms. He appointed new officials to oversee the city's repairs, to distribute grain more equitably, and to bring a measure of stability to the crownlands. He summoned lords from across the realm, urging them to attend a grand council in King's Landing. Many came warily, not daring to defy the new king so soon after witnessing what had happened to Gendry's host. Tyrion extended pardons where he could, but also made it clear that any betrayal would be met with dragonfire. Slowly, a fragile peace began to settle. Lords from the Reach, the Westerlands, the Crownlands, and even the Riverlands swore fealty. The Vale sent envoys, while the Iron Islands merely acknowledged his rule with a terse missive that suggested they remained insular and aloof. The greatest question lay in the north, where Queen Sansa Stark held sway. Tyrion sent ravens imploring her to join the realm under his rule. He wrote the letters himself, carefully crafting his words to appeal to her sense of pragmatism and mutual benefit. Yet, deep down, he suspected the North would not so easily bend. Sansa had endured too much, had carved out an independent kingdom after years of turmoil. Would she throw that away because Tyrion had a dragon? Perhaps not. But if the realm grew prosperous under Tyrion's rule, perhaps she would come to the table willingly. If not, a future conflict loomed, one Tyrion hoped to avoid. At night, Tyrion sometimes visited Hecavres in her subterranean chamber, a silent ritual that grounded him in the reality of his power. She grew day by day, her wingspans stretching to formidable lengths, her fangs sharper, her eyes reflecting cunning intelligence. He would speak to her softly, though he knew not if she understood. She was, in many ways, the living embodiment of his ambition. He felt both gratitude and dread in her presence. The day might come when she tested him, when her wild nature challenged his attempt to control her. For now, though she tolerated him, recognized him as the hand that fed her, the presence that soothed her. He ran a hand along her scaled flank, feeling the heat that radiated off her body. She was a creature of legend, a link to a time when Valyrian magic scorched the earth. One evening, as he left the dragon's chamber, he found Dario waiting in the corridor, leaning against a wall with that casual swagger. "You're as devoted as a mother to that beast," Dario said with a grin. Tyrion shrugged, locking the door behind him. "She needs tending. A dragon untended is a danger to all." Dario tilted his head. "And what of your mind, Lannister? You've done what few have dared. Seized the throne with a dragon's help. Do you sleep easily?" Tyrion eyed him. "No. Ruling never granted anyone easy sleep." Dario chuckled. "Well, I have to hand it to you. I've served ambitious people before, but you, my friend, are in a league of your own." His tone turned pensive. "I remember Daenerys, how she burned the city. So much suffering. You've shown a more measured hand, but still. Do you think the city will forgive another round of dragonfire?" Tyrion sighed, rubbing his forehead. "They'll forgive what they must. If I can bring them prosperity and relative peace, they'll learn to live with the memory of that courtyard. That's how people survive here." Dario's grin returned. "Pragmatic. Very well. I suppose, for the right price, I'll remain at your side a while longer. See how this new age of the Imp King unfolds." With that, Dario strolled away, leaving Tyrion alone in the torchlit corridor. Tyrion exhaled, feeling the weight of the crown upon his brow even though he wore no crown at that moment. He could not escape the sense that every victory set the stage for new challenges. Keeping the realm in line with fear was a perilous balancing act. He had grown up mocked for his size, overshadowed by the ambitions of others. Now the realm's fate rested on his shoulders, and on a dragon's wings. A month passed, then two. Tyrion received word that Samwell Tarly, the scholar and maester in training who had once served on the Night's Watch, had openly denounced Tyrion's cruelty. Samwell cited the burning of Gendry's men as evidence that King's Landing had learned nothing from past mistakes. Tyrion felt a flicker of guilt. He respected Sam, had once counted him as a friend, in a strange way during their time in the capital. But Tyrion could not allow dissent to spread unchallenged. So he issued a statement condemning Samwell as a traitor, effectively exiling him from the southern kingdoms. Such was the necessity of power. Old friendships became casualties. The Grand Council approached. Lords and ladies from across the realm gathered in King's Landing, uneasy and watchful. Tyrion presided over sessions in the Red Keep's Great Hall. Many proposed new laws, new trade agreements, new ways to unify the fractured territories. Tyrion listened, nodding, picking through each suggestion with sharp wit. At times, he offered half-smiles that reminded them of the imp's cunning. The presence of Hecavres hung over the proceedings like a specter. No one dared speak of the dragon openly, but the fear was there, etched into every wide-eyed glance. One morning, Tyrion called the council to order to address the crown's debts. He had inherited a treasury that was far from flush. Wars drained coffers, and paying mercenaries like Dario did not come cheap. A retinue of Iron Bank representatives had come, smelling opportunity in the city's new order. Tyrion negotiated with them, securing a loan on more favorable terms than the realm had seen in years. The bankers were uneasy, but they knew better than to show it. The memory of the courtyard served as a silent warning. Tyrion realized with a jolt that fear was becoming his currency. Could that truly last? On the council's second day, the lords of the Reach, the Westerlands, and the Riverlands pledged manpower and resources to rebuild roads and protect trade routes. A cautious optimism brewed among some that, under Tyrion's rule, the realm might at last see an end to the ceaseless strife. Yet on the evening of that same day, a disquieting rumor reached Tyrion's ears. A small group of conspirators, possibly led by a minor Stormlands lord who had survived the slaughter, was plotting Tyrion's assassination. Tyrion confronted the rumor calmly. Assassination attempts were part and parcel of rule. He doubled his guard, stationed loyal men at key points, and had the suspect Stormlands lord discreetly detained for questioning. Hours later, the man died under interrogation, never confessing to any specific plot. Tyrion felt no triumph in the act. It only underscored how precarious his position remained. The city might be bowed, but it was not broken. Perhaps it never truly would be. Sometimes, standing on the balcony overlooking the capital, Tyrion felt that King's Landing itself was the true dragon. Uncontrollable, ferocious, always ready to devour those who claimed to rule it. It was during one such pensive moment that Podrick sought him out, an apologetic expression on his face. "My lord," Podrick said, bowing. "Apologies for the intrusion, but a rider just arrived from the north, bearing a response from Queen Sansa." Tyrion turned, heart fluttering slightly. "Oh, give it here." Podrick handed over a folded parchment sealed with the direwolf of House Stark. Tyrion peeled it open, scanning the neat handwriting. "King Tyrion, the North hears of your might and the power of your dragon. We do not seek war with the South, but neither do we bend. Winterfell remains sovereign. Should your armies or your dragon cross our borders, we will respond with whatever force is necessary to protect our independence. I knew you once as a man capable of kindness and empathy. For the sake of the realm, I hope you remember those qualities. Rule wisely. Burn no more cities. Sansa Stark, Queen in the North." Tyrion read the words twice, a complex blend of emotions stirring in him. She would not bend, but she did not threaten him beyond the promise of self-defense. It was an uneasy truce at best. He dismissed Podrick with a nod and remained gazing at Sansa's letter. He recalled their fleeting marriage, those days when she was a frightened girl in King's Landing, and he a scorned dwarf. So much had changed. He murmured her name softly. Burn no more cities. The memory of Daenerys's rampage haunted him. He recalled his own vow to never let it happen again. And yet, he had burned men in that courtyard, had used dragonfire to secure his crown. It was different, he told himself. That was a battle, not a slaughter of innocents. But a small voice in his mind challenged him. In the end, does the difference matter to those who died screaming? He folded the parchment and tucked it away. Sansa's stance did not surprise him. Perhaps in time, they could find a path to reconciliation. Perhaps trade and mutual prosperity would accomplish what force of arms could not. For now, the North would remain aloof, and Tyrion would concentrate on holding the South together under his new monarchy. Days turned to weeks, and the Grand Council concluded. Many lords departed King's Landing, returning to their lands to implement the new edicts. Tyrion's hold on power seemed firm, though the city's undercurrent of fear had not abated. There were whispers of discontent, especially among the common folk who resented the heavy cost of feeding a dragon. But for the moment, no open challenges arose. On one such day, Tyrion sat alone in the royal solar, sifting through more correspondence. A faint wisp of a headache pressed behind his eyes. Leading the realm meant endless decisions, from adjudicating disputes over farmland to negotiating fishing rights off the coast. He reached for a goblet of wine, only to discover the flask empty. He cursed softly. Drinking had once been his constant companion. These days he tried to moderate, mindful that a drunken king was a vulnerable king. Still, at this moment he craved the taste to dull his tension. Suddenly, the door opened, and Podrick peeked in, his expression urgent. "My lord, Ser Randall Prester requests an audience." Tyrion glanced at the slant of sunlight. It was late afternoon. "Send him in." Moments later, Ser Randall entered, bowing. "Your Grace, apologies, but we've received a raven from the Riverlands. A matter of some urgency." Tyrion gestured for him to continue. Ser Randall cleared his throat. "It seems Walder Rivers, an outlaw who's been stirring rebellion, has attacked a caravan bound for King's Landing. The men claim they will kill any who pay taxes to the Lannister king, and rumor has it they've gained support from some hedge knights in the region." Tyrion rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Outlaws, rebels, so soon after the council. Why am I not surprised?" He paused. "We'll need to dispatch soldiers to quell this, show them we won't tolerate banditry. But do it carefully. I don't want unnecessary bloodshed. Let the realm see we can enforce peace without blanketing everything in Dragonfire." Ser Randall nodded. "As you command, Your Grace." He bowed and left. Tyrion sat in silence, pondering the new development. If rebellions like this took root, it might embolden others. The memory of Gendry's men burning in the courtyard flickered in his mind. Would he have to unleash Hecavries on small-time bandits too? That seemed a step too far, a horrifying escalation. But if the rebellion grew, he sighed. So many decisions hinged on the presence of that dragon. She was his advantage, yet also his burden, forcing him to toe a line between intimidation and tyranny. That night, he found himself unable to sleep again. So he rose from his bed, donned a simple robe, and wandered through the dark corridors of the Red Keep. The guards saluted him as he passed, eyes widening at the sight of the king at such an hour. Eventually, he arrived at the dragon's chamber, the door guarded by 4 of his most trusted knights. They let him pass without a word. Inside, Hecavries lay curled in a far corner, her black form blending with the darkness save for the faint sheen of torchlight on her scales. The heat radiating from her body kept the chamber warmer than the summer sun. She lifted her head when he approached, smoke coiling from her nostrils. Tyrion stepped closer, maintaining a cautious distance from her jaws. He observed her chest rising and falling, a living symbol of power. The flicker of torchlight danced across her pupils, giving her gaze an otherworldly glow. He whispered softly, words more for himself than for her. "You and I, we changed the course of history. We have the power to remake this realm, or destroy it. I wonder which it will be." She made no reply, only flicked her tail. Tyrion stood there for a long time, feeling the weight of the crown pressing on him even in its absence, wondering if he was already past the point of no return. In the weeks that followed, Tyrion's men drove out the outlaws in the Riverlands, capturing Walder Rivers and ending that rebellion with minimal bloodshed. Tyrion offered amnesty to any who would lay down arms. Some accepted, others fled. The realm, for the moment, remained at peace. Taxes began to flow into the crown's coffers. The roads grew safer. King's Landing, while still wary of its new king, tentatively flourished with increased trade. Ships from Essos brought exotic goods, merchants hawked wares in the bustling markets, and the city watch kept order with a firm hand. Yet Tyrion knew that his rule hung by a single thread: the dragon. If ever Hecavries was killed or disappeared, the realm might turn on him in a heartbeat. He wondered if he should attempt to breed more dragons, to solidify a dynasty. But that was a puzzle beyond his immediate reach. Hecavrys was female, he suspected, but finding a male dragon, if one even existed, was a daunting endeavor. And each day, the cost of feeding her mounted. The crown's gold was finite, and though the kingdom was recovering, there were many demands on the treasury. Some of Tyrion's small council members began to murmur about the burden Hecavrys imposed. Others insisted she remain the highest priority, the reason the realm obeyed. Tyrion heard these arguments in silence, acknowledging both the truth and the danger of them. Meanwhile, letters trickled down from the north. Sansa and Tyrion's correspondences were polite, yet distant. She inquired about the well-being of the southern people, and he responded with carefully curated updates. She never hinted at bending the knee, and he never pressed her on it. Their uneasy peace settled into an understanding neither was eager to break. One late afternoon, as Tyrion held court in the throne room, hearing petitions from commoners and lords alike, a commotion erupted at the doors. A ragged man in battered armor stumbled forward, shouting something about a conspiracy. The guards moved to intercept him, but Tyrion raised a hand, gesturing for them to let the man speak. "Your Grace," the man cried, falling to his knees trembling. "I served with Tarly. I ran after the dragon attacked. I found a band of men in the Stormlands. They're gathering. They plan to—" The man's words were cut short by a sudden spasm. His eyes bulged, foam flecked his lips, and he collapsed to the floor, convulsing. Gasps filled the throne room. A hush fell as the man's body went limp. Tyrion's pulse quickened. Poison. Someone had silenced him before he could speak further. Tyrion felt the old dread churn in his gut. Even now, conspiracies shadowed his rule. He rose from the Iron Throne, the metal scraping against his back as if to remind him of its sharp edges. "Seize anyone he came with," Tyrion ordered. "Lock down the gates until we find the source of this." Guards sprang into motion. The tension in the hall grew thick as the courtiers realized the king suspected an assassination plot. Tyrion realized that his hold on power, though formidable, was far from unassailable. There were always more hidden enemies. That night, Tyrion gazed at the flickering shadows on his chamber wall, the events of the day swirling in his mind. Could another civil war be brewing in the Stormlands? Would he be forced to unleash Hecavrys again to quell it? Each time he resorted to Dragonfire, he whittled away at the realm's potential trust, forging a rule based on terror. And each time, he remembered Sansa's warning to burn no more cities. He sank into a chair, swirling a cup of watered wine, wishing he could talk to someone who understood the burden of ruling with such power. Daenerys was gone. Jon Snow was beyond the wall. Varys was dead. Bronn had left for a lucrative retirement. Jaime was long gone. Cersei, Tyrion did not care to think about. Only ghosts remained, leaving him alone with the weight of the crown and the monstrous might beneath the keep. "Is this truly worth it?" he murmured to himself. At that moment, he felt the yawning chasm between the illusions of power and its grim realities. He had achieved the improbable. He had become king, his dwarf stature overshadowed by the unstoppable presence of a dragon. But what had it cost him? What did it continue to cost him? The torchlight danced on the polished floor, as if mocking him with silent laughter. Then came a knock at the door. It was Podrick, entering hesitantly. "My lord, I've come to bring you supper and to inform you that the gates are secured. We've questioned everyone the dead man was seen with, but found no evidence of a plot." Yet, Tyrion nodded. "Very well, Podrick. Keep searching. We cannot let such a threat go unanswered." Podrick hesitated, then spoke softly. "My lord, if I may, are you well? You seem troubled." A wry smile crossed Tyrion's lips. Podrick, ever loyal, was perhaps the only one who dared ask such a question. "I am a king now, Pod, and the last king in King's Landing saw the city burned. All I can do is try not to repeat such horrors." Podrick set the supper tray on a table, a simple meal of stew and bread. "You're not like the Mad Queen," he said quietly. "You only used the dragon to defend the city." Tyrion gave a non-committal nod. A dozen retorts rose in his mind, but he merely said, "Thank you, Pod." After Podrick left, Tyrion stared at the tray, appetite gone. He forced himself to eat a few spoonfuls of stew, the taste bland on his tongue. Then he rose and walked to the window, gazing out at the city lights. King's Landing sprawled below in a chaotic tapestry, flickers of lanterns and torches marking the neighborhood. Yes, somewhere out there, conspirators might be plotting his downfall. Somewhere out there, common folk were huddled in cramped hovels, hoping the new king would not scorch them with dragonfire. Tyrion wondered if any king had ever truly found peace in this role. Perhaps not, but he would soldier on, forging alliances, crushing rebellions, balancing fear and mercy in the dance of power. In the distance, the wind shifted, carrying the faint tang of the sea. Tyrion closed his eyes, recalling the sense of wonder he'd once felt crossing the narrow sea, meeting Daenerys Targaryen. So much had changed since then. He had once been a reluctant hand. Now he was the king with a single dragon at his command. The question that haunted him was whether that single dragon, and his own cunning, would be enough to hold the realm together. The realm was a fractious beast, prone to rebellions and shifting loyalties. All he could do was continue the game, step by step, forging a new narrative in the history of Westeros. Outside, a gull cried, cutting through the quiet, and Tyrion opened his eyes. He turned from the window, the faint golden glow of his chamber lamps illuminating him. The crown on his head cast a shadow along the wall, a silhouette that looked oddly tall and fearsome, thanks to the flickering light. For a moment, it made him laugh bitterly. The dwarf whose shadow towered over the land, thanks to the monstrous shape that followed him. A hush settled in the room once more, and Tyrion moved to extinguish the lamps. Tomorrow would bring fresh challenges, new threats, and the perpetual balancing act of fear, diplomacy, and the responsibilities of kingship. He sighed, pulling off his crown and setting it on the table with a dull clang of metal. So be it, he thought. He had chosen this path. There was no turning back. Let the lords and small folk whisper of the Dragon King in King's Landing. Let them question his worthiness, his methods, his secrets. For now, at least, the city obeyed, the realm bent, and Hecavres dozed in the deep vault beneath the Red Keep, a living promise that no one, neither Stormlord nor rebel nor any other self-proclaimed king, would dare challenge Tyrion of House Lannister without trembling at the roar of dragonfire. And so, with a weary breath, Tyrion allowed himself to sink into a chair, alone with the hush of the night and the unrelenting truth that sometimes, to stand tall in Westeros, one needed a dragon's wings to lift them.